Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 5, Episode 21 before the end of the season. And boy, oh boy, do I have gear stuff to talk about. Happy New Gear. I don't know. It's the end of the year. Gear shows up at the end of the year. And I feel like I'm giddy. The last couple of weeks have just been like kind of gear crazy. And I figured I would talk about some of this because it might be helpful, might be interesting. And then that's the piece de resistance of this episode is sort of a follow-up on the Canon versus Sony situation. And, well, we'll just call them developments, I guess. But before we jump into, as we jump into that, I just always say before we jump into that, I'm using a different microphone today. This is actually basically the first time I have used this microphone. I did a quick test when I got it last week, and then I haven't used it until right now because I haven't had a chance to. So I plugged it in. I'm using it right now, thinking it sounds pretty good. This microphone was just given to me by a friend, but it's cool, and I'm excited to have it because I've never had one of these. I've never used one of these. Yet, I think it's a good one to have, especially for, different comparisons and different things like that, and just the legacy of it. So what I'm using today is the Electrovoice RE20, and this is the RE20 Black. So it's the same as the original, except it is black instead of the like off color kind of tan that is the normal one, which honestly, I know that's like the accurate color to when this microphone first came out, but I don't really like it, which has been a huge reason why I've just never paid attention to it because I didn't like the color of the microphone. If you're unfamiliar with the RE20, it's a pretty legendary microphone. It is a dynamic microphone that first showed up in the current form, basically, other than being black, that I'm using right now in 1969. The one I'm using is from 2021. And I'm sure there have been, various component changes and stuff throughout the years or the manufacturing process, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same microphone that has shown up there, which is interesting because there's been a reason that I've overlooked the RE22 lately, which has to do with the SM7B. Those two seem to be like the heavyweight titans that are always, out to knock each other out. And the SM7B grew to such popularity in the last few years, basically kind of became ubiquitous. We've talked about it on here before, how it is a really great microphone, the SM7B, but it's really not, no microphone is perfect for everybody. And the SM7B, with the price tag, and then also the fact that it is so quiet and you need a booster, it can be expensive if you're just starting out to jump in, getting an SM7B and getting it up and running to the point where it's going to sound the way that you want it to sound. And there's nothing wrong with that if you have the budget for it, but if you don't have the budget for it, it can be frustrating, which is why I've always been hesitant to recommend it, as opposed to something like this microphone that I'm carefully trying to swivel over here, which would be the Shure MV7X, which I've used on here. I wasn't actually planning to do this, but this is the Electrovoice, and this is the Shure MV7X. I wasn't planning on even using this. That was a very quick thing there, but just so you could hear some comparisons, there's a lot of difference in comparison in tonal qualities, but the Shure that I'm speaking into right now I think the MSRP is $180, which I did feel was a little too high when it came out, but now I've seen it, I don't know if it's the holidays or if Shure's readjusting, I've seen it closer to 150, 160, which makes it kind of unbeatable. I think this is an amazing sounding microphone. I am running it through, what booster is this going into? This is running through the Clark Technic CT1 just to get a proper level. I could get a level without it, but it's better through a booster. But I think this is an amazing sounding microphone, and it's quite close to the SM7B in the basics. And we'll go back to the RE20, which really does sound good. At least I think it sounds good. And and there's a reason that it's a popular microphone. It has been a popular microphone for so long. But with the growth in popularity of the SM7B, what ended up happening were a lot of people got SM7Bs that really it wasn't the right mic for them. It was just the mic they saw, the one they knew about, and that's the one you get. And what I've noticed in maybe the last 6 months is there has been this shift to the RE20 or different versions. There's slight variations and things. And since they did come out with this black version, I think there were a lot of people kind of like me who like just didn't like the. I think it's hard to describe if you've not seen the original RE20 color. I know it's probably classic, and I'm probably offending a bunch of people who are more knowledgeable than me about broadcast history and whatnot. But the classic traditional RE20 color is like if you think of a piece of electronic gear from 1960 or 1970, it's sort of that. It's like not tan, but it's not white, but it's not brown, but it's not like a nickel finish. It's sort of just this beige but not beige kind of color. And I've just never been a fan with it. They came out with a black version, and suddenly so many people were like, I'm leaving the SM7B. And what I think that was honestly, maybe it's people finding a better microphone, but I think a lot of it was people making the same mistake twice. And everyone has the SM7B, so now I'm gonna look for something different because I don't want to have the same microphone that everyone else has. And then this is like the same price. It's actually been out, which I didn't know. It has been out longer than the SM7B, I believe. Could be wrong on this, and I know I have a computer sitting in front of me, but I'm a lazy man sometimes. I believe the SM7B was first released, or the SM7 was 1974 or thereabouts, and the current version of the SM7B, if I'm not mistaken, came out in 2001, in the early 2000s. We'll say that. And that's been the only revision in its like near 50-year history at this point. And the RE20 is actually a few years older than that, which is crazy. So 1969, with now it comes in a black version, and anyway. And there are versions with other pickup patterns. So it's a super popular mic. I haven't had any experience with it. I know it's becoming more and more popular now. And it's one of those ones where it was like, I wasn't going to spend the money on it just because, how many microphones I have. I don't need to spend $400 on another microphone. But having the chance to add one, having the chance to, just be given one that someone wasn't using and have that now in my lineup is awesome. And I really, really do like it. And the thing that really endeared me to it more than I realized is that this is the same microphone that was used on the TV show Frasier. So if you watched Frasier from 1993 to 2004, whenever it was on the air, and Kelsey Grammer was in the radio station doing the call-in show, he was talking into an RE20. I never noticed that. I never knew it. And I watched that show so much, so many like reruns and original airings. Anyway, it's the Frasier microphone. That's its real claim to fame. So that's a new piece of gear that I have that I'm using right now. And really what it is one of my friends and friend of the show kind of donated a bunch of gear that he didn't need anymore. And a lot of it is like either brand new or in like new condition, like this RE20. And basically it's either, if I have a use for it or want to make videos about it, or pass it along to our Just Create More community in some way. Or we've been doing, or I did it once, or I did set up a store where everything was $1, called it the Buck Stop. And then people could just buy, it was like stuff that I didn't need, like pod mics, mic arms, a lot of different microphones actually were there, and like an audio interface, I think. So it was less about making money off the gear, because you don't make any money when you're selling stuff for $1 and then shipping it all over the world. But it's more about like putting gear in places where it's going to be used, because that's my big thing is I just want gear to get used. I hate when it sits and doesn't get used. This RE20 is something I'm definitely going to use because I really like the sound of it, and having it in the lineup to compare with others is super helpful, but also being able to pass some of the other great stuff along. That was like a super cool thing that showed up unexpectedly, so I appreciate that. And then other gear news, I was going to make this whole episode about this one thing, but maybe we'll do that another time. I don't know, which is I bought the most expensive camera that I've ever had by far. Sort of, asterisk, because I got it for $400 on eBay. But when this camera was brand new, the whole setup that I have would be somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000. And I did not pay that much for it. And it is a Sony DSR 370, which is a television ENG, electronic news gathering camera from 2003. The reason I wanted to get that is because I worked at a TV station. I started working at a TV station as an intern in 2001, and I worked there in various positions, both paid and unpaid, all the way through like 2006. And when I first started, 2001, 2002, that time frame, I spent a lot of time going out in the field with reporters, photographers. Sometimes I'd have my own camera and stuff, and they were all these DV cams. It's funny because this one's from 2003, so it's actually newer than the cameras I was using, which were like, it was such a treat to just get to look through the viewfinder, get to switch a button or something. And I've just always wanted an ENG camera, and I found one that was in great working condition. It only has I think it's like 400 hours of use on it in all of these years, nearly 20 years. And it came with a Fujinon lens, which is a really cool ENG lens. They can do amazing things. If you're talking about if you're used to the camera lenses that a lot of us use regularly, an ENG lens is a totally different beast because it basically, even though you can change lenses on the camera, you never need to because I think this is like an 8-to-1. Let me look. This is a 7.3 millimeter to 113 millimeter lens on a 1/3 inch sensor. It's a small sensor because it's a CCD standard definition camera. But the lens is amazing. It's an aperture 1.8, a constant aperture. And then it also has an insane macro mode, which is super cool. And it has auto zoom. So you can do manual zoom or you can do automatic super smooth zoom. It's an amazing lens. And the image quality, even though it's still 4:3 standard definition, the image quality is phenomenal. I need to find a way to bring this into a video because it's so good. It's not, honestly, if you put it up against your iPhone's going to be better. But I think this image quality is phenomenal. And so much of it has to do with the lens and just the look that you can get from that kind of lens on that kind of camera, that kind of sensor. It really just has a certain look and feel to it. So I'm excited about that. I love the ENG camera form factor, the big cameras that go on your shoulder, the big viewfinder. There's physical switches and buttons for everything and every setting. You've got built-in audio. There's 3 XLR ports on it. Just big V-mount batteries, outputs for everywhere. It's just a big, giant hunk of metal. And, built-in ND filters and stuff. It's a super cool, super fun camera. So you will be hearing more about it because I've been having so much fun with it. I've just been filming constantly. I had to buy some new tapes and things. So that's been a cool piece of gear. And it was it's so crazy to have that because I remember working at the TV station when I was an intern. So the most time that I spent going out, quote unquote, in the field, which was to do stories with reporters and photographers and stuff, was from 2001 to 2002. Maybe a year and a half in that period. And that it was really cool to learn a lot from those people. And I got paired up with some really talented photographers and reporters and stuff. For the most part, I was kind of like the assistant. So, because I was a kid, I was still in high school, I was an unpaid intern. So I would be carrying a lot of tripods and cables and help set up live feeds and, that kind of stuff. And every once in a while, I would hold the microphone during interviews, but every so often, depending on the photographer I was with, they would go okay, here's a camera, go get some shots of blah, blah, blah. Or, do you want to set up this interview shot? And they would kind of look over my shoulder, which was great. And that's how it should be because technically unpaid interns, which by the way, I wasn't even supposed to be an intern. But this was the beauty of things in 2001 is I had sent the TV station a letter in the mail. It's just our local news station, our ABC affiliate. And I had sent them a letter in the mail that just said, I'm a freshman and I would love to be an intern. Can you do that? And they said, sure. And they brought me in with the summer interns in 2001. And when I said freshman, they thought I meant freshman in college. But I was a freshman in high school. So I was way younger than everybody else. But for some reason, nobody questioned this. And it just was a thing that happened. And then I guess I did a good enough job where at the end of those 2 or 3 months of summer, when they let all the other interns go, they wanted to keep me on weekends throughout the whole thing. And then I got to intern the next summer. And then I got moved into the promotions and production department. And then I had some paid positions as a floor director and an editor. and promotions producer and master control, basically like every facet of the production part of the TV station. At one point or another, I either had a paid position in or was an intern in, and it was awesome. But that first year to year and a half was where I spent most of my time actually going out of the station into the world, and being able to use these cameras was so much fun. But there was a photographer who I would be paired with on the weekends, and he was a really nice guy, but he was not the best photographer. And I was like 15 at the time, 14 to 15, maybe going on 16. So I was going to listen to whatever the person I was with, the adult I was with, was telling me to do. And he was somebody who would, white balance was always off on his footage. Like, it was always blue, always orange, never had white balance correct. He definitely spent a lot of his time, like when we would go somewhere that wasn't just a fire or a car accident or something. If we went to like an event and there were people there, he would definitely use his like, hey, I've got a TV camera and I'm with the news, to like flirt with girls and stuff. And then I would just be there like, hi, I'm in high school. And so it wasn't like the most professional. During the week when I would intern, the photographers I would intern with, especially one specifically, they were like super pro, and they knew everything about the cameras. They could do these amazing, they'd have these like super creative ideas, even for the most boring stories and shots, and how to set up interviews in cool ways. And I got to learn a lot from them. But on the weekends, it was like there's no rules. It's like staying at your like weird uncle's house that has no rules, and you're just going crazy. And so what he would do sometimes is interns weren't allowed to have cameras or check out cameras, but there's nobody there on the weekends. And so when we'd go in the equipment room in the morning to get ready, because you get your equipment and then you go out in the news truck for the whole day, basically, and you come back kind of in the mid-afternoon with all your footage, and then either you edit it together for some basic stuff, or you give it to a reporter or something, or an editor to edit things together for like the 5, 6, 10, 11 o'clock news throughout the night. And so in the mornings when we'd be getting ready, he'd be grabbing like, you'd go in this big equipment room and there's all the cameras and all the tripods and microphones and stuff. And he would be grabbing stuff. And most of the time he would just grab 2 cameras and one would be for me and one would be for him. And like, we would go places and I'd have my own camera, which was super not kosher in terms of the TV station thing. But it was amazing for me because I got to just go for it. And I was still kind of like the second shooter. So there wasn't even the pressure of like, I was an additional shooter for a story, not the main shooter. And that was super fun. And this is basically one of those cameras that now I can use whenever I want because I own it. And there's no weird rules being broken by shady photographers or anything. Although I keep saying shady, it did actually help me a lot that he broke those rules. So I don't know, whether it was good, bad, right, or wrong is your call. Anyway, that camera is super fun. And oh boy, that was going to tie into something. I had this whole nice transition, but I lost it. But that has been, oh no, I dropped something. That has been a great piece of gear. But to put a cap on that, I capped my lens right now. And I have gotten, okay, here's where we can dive into the meat of this gear discussion. I never get new lenses. So prior to getting my Sony camera, I had like the same couple of lenses for years. And really I'm not someone who tends to get a lot of lenses because I have what I like, I have what works, and that's kind of what I stick with. In the past 2 weeks, I've gotten 2 new lenses, like not old from 20 years ago or anything, but like actual new legit lenses that have kind of changed a lot. And yeah, they sort of set me on a path that I didn't, or at least they made me realize maybe I was on an equipment path that I didn't realize I was fully on. So the first one is fascinating, and it is the Sarui 50mm anamorphic lens, the full frame one. You probably saw some videos about this maybe like 2 or 3 months ago when it was first announced. But I've never owned a Sarui lens before. I had like some of their tripods and monopods and stuff for my media program, but I've never used their lenses. But it's crazy because I think I mentioned this on an episode a while back, but yeah, I definitely did actually, because for September 11th this year, National Geographic produced a documentary series that was like, I think it's called One Day in America, and it just chronicles all these stories of things that happened on 9/11. It's incredibly well done and so well put together. I highly recommend that you watch it, because it's like, especially the further we get away from events like that, it's easy to forget about stuff, and this brings it all back and makes it very real. And it's done in a way with like, there's a ton of care and attention, and it really does a good job of making all those little like people that you see running around and all those like, it makes them real people and real stories. And that they spent, I don't know, I must spend like 20 years gathering all the footage to these specific moments. So most of those documentaries are handheld footage from 2001, like people who just happen to be recording on their handy cams or their News ENG cameras or whatever. But when they do interviews, current day interviews with people, they have them set up in their beautiful interviews. Like the camera's totally locked down. It's not moving at all, which is a very stark contrast to the rest of the series where it's all stuff that's happening on the day and cameras are super shaky. And then it cuts to these anamorphic interviews with people that they're color graded really nice, they're framed and lit really well, and then the anamorphic framing is just strange, and so the contrast between that and the raw footage is it just works in a really effective way. So watching this, I noticed how good these interviews looked, and it was blowing my mind. And I was thinking, I've never really understood anamorphic lenses, and so I thought, I think that's what they're using there, is an anamorphic lens. I've only known like the cheesy like anamorphic lens flare, like ha ha ha. Everyone makes the J.J. Abrams jokes. I was like, this is really interesting because it's got like a compressed background, like a telephoto lens would have, but the field of view is super wide, which is weird, like a wide angle lens would have. How are you doing this? And then that's when I looked into how they made that, and I did find that I think they used ARRI Alexa cameras or some kind of ARRI cameras, and they used anamorphic lenses. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. You can do really cool things with the anamorphic lenses. And then I looked up, like, are there full frame anamorphic lenses? I don't know. I've only seen the other ones that, like, there was a batch of budget anamorphic lenses that came out last year, but they're all for like crop sensor cameras. And it just so happened that like at that exact same time, Surui announced the 50 millimeter full frame one. There wasn't one up until like literally the day I looked it up was the day they announced it, just by coincidence. And there was like an embargo wave of, YouTubers talking about it a while ago. So you might have seen some of those videos. Caleb Pike did a really good one on it. And Peter Lindgren did one too, because I know he had the lens for a long time. But I didn't do that. I just went to the Indiegogo and paid for the lens. They had like a slight discount if you were part of the pre-launch campaign or whatever. And then I had to wait like since September to November to get it, because it took a while, and it finally got here, and it's so friggin' cool. So if you've been thinking about doing a Surui Indiegogo campaign, totally worth it, totally above board. I think it just helps them produce the exact right number of products instead of like, I don't know. But the quality of this thing is unreal. It's like, I mean, if you've ever held a cinema lens, that's what it feels like a true, it's a heavy, well put together thing. It's all metal. It has an aperture ring and a focus ring, and both of them, I have to hold the lens while I'm telling you about it, by the way, even though you can't see it. It's just to make the effect very real. Both of the rings are, they feel really, really good. If you watch some of the YouTube reviews of this lens, they were pre-production units, which is one of the things I don't like about embargo things. A lot of times people are working with pre-production firmware, pre-production products, and you're not getting the actual, like, this is what it would be like if you bought it. So the actual production version, some people had said in their videos that like the rings felt a little weird, or the aperture ring felt weird. On my lens, both rings feel exactly the same, and they feel really good. They're like really, they're exactly how you would want a high quality lens ring to feel, and they're I can't remember what it's called, like geared so you could put like a follow focus or a zoom, or well, not a zoom, it's a prime lens. You could put a follow focus or an iris adjuster on there if you wanted. And I got the Sony E-mount, and this thing, it's a T2.9, which is, in terms of f-stop, I can't remember exactly what it is. It's like an f.9 equivalent, f1.2. I looked it up, but I don't remember what it is. It's a very wide lens, very fast lens, but it's a 50 millimeter, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I wanted something that would give me that nice compressed background look, but still have a wide field of view, which my regular 50 millimeter lenses don't do. I currently have the Canon RF 51.8, which I love. That's a $200 lens. It's so good. If you have a Canon RF camera and you don't have that lens, get it. I have a whole review on my channel about it, but it's very affordable. It's so sharp and it works so well. It's amazing. When I got my Sony camera, I did get the Sony 50 millimeter 1.8, like their lowest, cheapest 50 millimeter lens, and I actually don't like it that much. I don't use it that often. I feel bad. I'm looking at it right now, and I feel like I'm not. It's a good lens. I guess if I didn't have the Canon, I would think it's a good lens, but it's nowhere near as sharp as the Canon. It actually kind of looks like when I take my grandpa's old 50 millimeter lens that I have from the film camera, the AE1 he bought back in the 70s or the 80s, and I adapt that lens to like one of my Canon cameras. It kind of looks like that. It's very like sort of soft and glowy, which is cool if you want a vintage retro effect, but I don't. When I bought the 50 millimeter lens for my super cool 4K camera, I didn't want that. I wanted sharp and crisp. So I'm kind of bummed out about that. But now this lens, this 50 millimeter lens is like, it's so incredibly sharp. It like literally looks like you could just reach into the screen and like grab something off the screen. It's like, it's just so crisp and sharp. And the anamorphic qualities on this are outstanding, which go way beyond lens flares. So I've done lots of like test photos and videos. I've posted some of them on Instagram if you want to see them. But I've also filmed so far one video with it entirely, which that video will probably come out next week. Well, it depends on when you're listening to this. That video will probably come out on the second week of December 2021. So that's going to be, the video is just all about mic boosters. So it's like the Clark Technic and the FET head and the Cloud Lifter and stuff. I'm just explaining and comparing mic boosters. So for no reason at all, it's filmed with an anamorphic lens. And it's really funny because when you film with an anamorphic lens and you put your footage into your computer, the footage is squished. Like it's squeezed together. Everybody looks super tall and smashed. And you have to de-squeeze it, which is pretty easy. For the most part, it's just like in Final Cut, you just go to the transform tool. You go to the Y axis, and you just de-squeeze it by a certain amount. This is a 1.6, I don't know, not a crop squeeze, whatever, anamorphic squeeze. So there's like calculators online where you can figure out like, this is my project size, my timeline size, my lens resolution, all this stuff. And it'll tell you like how much you need to de-squeeze it so things look right. You know, you could also eyeball it. Probably not the most legit way to do it, but you could. But there's a really cool calculator. If you look up anamorphic calculator, you'll find it. It's from the same guy who runs Anamorphic on a Budget, which is a really cool YouTube channel all about anamorphic lenses. He made this amazing calculator, so you can check. I forget his name right now. I apologize, but you can check that out if you have an anamorphic lens, and then it will tell you exactly what you need to type in to de-squeeze the footage and make it look right. It's super easy. The problem is then it is very, very wide. It's like a super wide aspect ratio, which I think looks amazing. That's half the reason I wanted the lens. But if you put that on a normal timeline, you're going to have black bars at the top and bottom. That's why you have black bars normally. You can then make your timeline the dimensions of the anamorphic footage. So that way there are no black bars when you export it. And when you upload to YouTube, YouTube will, the player will conform to whatever aspect ratio you upload. On desktop. On mobile, at least on iPhone and iPad, it does still put in black bars. And so I was bummed because I love the way it looks really wide, but I figured a lot of people would get really annoyed if they were watching on mobile and they're like, why are you trying to make like ultra cinematic mic booster video? So I just cropped in and filled the frame like normal, even though it was filmed with the anamorphic lens. And there's a few shots throughout the video where I use the full width so you can see everything, and it looks really cool. But anyway, that's coming out soon, and that's been really fun. And I did strategically position a light. I'm facing the camera in the video. You know how you face cameras when you talk to them. I don't know why I had to clarify that, but I'm facing the camera, and I put a small light behind me. So if I wanted to, just as I was talking, if I kind of moved to one side, the light would shine, and then you would get a lens flare, and then I could move and cover it up. And that's been fun. That is a characteristic of anamorphic lenses, are the lens flares. Surui, the lenses that came out last year, they seem to go crazy with lens flares, at least in the videos I watched, the ones for the crop sensor cameras. It's like if there's a light on screen, it's going to flare. The pre-production models of this lens that were in a lot of the YouTube reviews also seem to flare a lot. And they did say that they were going to reduce that in the release version, which I think just has to do with whatever coating they put on the front of the lens will affect how it flares or doesn't flare. And they totally did, because this lens will flare if you put a light, if you shine a light right into it. You're going to get a blue lens flare, which looks kind of awesome, honestly. But kind of other than that, you're not really going to get flares. Like if you don't want it to flare, you can easily make it not flare. And that's cool, because then it makes it this like, it's a creative choice up to you if you want lens flares or not. I actually really do like the lens flare look. If people talk about the 2009 Star Trek, I love the way that movie looks. So, or even whatever J.J. Abrams stuff, Star Wars Episode 7 is also a really cool one that comes to mind like that. So, it's cool to do it for real instead of putting like fake lens flares and stuff. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that either, but this has been super fun. And beyond lens flares, like I said, you get that interesting thing of having a compressed background where normally you would have to have a telephoto lens, but you still have a really wide field of view. I don't know what the equivalent field of view would be, but it's not what a normal 50 millimeter lens would be. So it's like when you're filming with it, it almost, to me, in what I'm used to, feels like I'm using my 24 millimeter lens with a 50 millimeter compression. And it's like, it's strange, nothing else looks like that. And that is really cool. And that's one of the things I like about it. There's also just something about anamorphic lenses where it's almost like how the subject that is in focus is so clear, and then the way that things go out of focus, it's different than spherical lenses where it's like this is in focus, this is out of focus. It's kind of like there's almost like a gradient of focus, or like it looks weird, but in a way that I really like. And then the bokeh balls take on different orientations and stuff. If you saw the movie Black Widow, which I think was actually kind of awesome and totally overlooked, that whole thing was shot with anamorphic lenses, and it has a very specific look and feel to it. So that's another one where it's not like that there are definitely a lot of lens flares in that movie, but you can see a lot of the more anamorphic characteristics popping out, which are really cool. Fun fact about anamorphic lenses too is right now they're kind of marketed as this thing of like, yeah, if you want to look like a real movie, if you want to do, look cinematic, that's what anamorphic comes from. But they themselves are sort of a cheat, because way back in the, I don't know, what was it, the 60s or the 70s, maybe even prior to that? Yeah, maybe even prior to that. Basically, not unlike today where people stop going to the movies and then the movies have to go like, oh, wait, no, it's 3D. The screen is huge. The chair does this thing and the sound is like, they have to really up the ante to make you want to go to the movie. The same thing sort of happened back when people started having TVs in their home and stuff, and maybe they didn't want to go to the movies as much. Was we're gonna make the screens look even bigger and the movies look even bigger by shooting everything super wide, because on your little square TV at home, it's a square. You can't put anything wide on that, but the theater screen is this big wide rectangle. We're gonna make it crazy, crazy wide. And the problem was a lot of the movie studios were like, well, we have these super big, expensive cameras, and we don't want to buy new ones, or I don't know, have to invent new cameras to do this super wide aspect ratio. And that's where anamorphic lenses came in, was basically they could be used on existing cameras to sort of cheat things and make it look super wide. So it's kind of like a cheat, so basically they didn't have to spend money on new cameras. But then over many, many years, as with a lot of things when it comes to cinema, 24 frames per second, whatever, we become so accustomed to it that we do associate it with a certain level of quality and a certain level of, professionalism, even though the actual origins of it, like 24 frames a second, for example, there's nothing, I guess it looks natural, sort of. I don't know if 24 frames a second actually is the most natural looking frame rate, but it's definitely the lowest number of frames you can have before things start looking weird. And if you're a movie studio and you're making a movie and you're paying for film, being able to use as little film as possible is important. And if you do 15 frames a second, it's going to look like a weird, stuttery, stop motion fever dream. So 24 frames a second, hey, look at that. That looks normal, and it's the least amount of frames we need to use. So 24 frames a second is what we'll use. Like, a lot of it is just cost-saving measures that were established at one point in the past, and anamorphic's the same, but then it turns into its own thing. Kind of interesting. Where were we? So I got that lens. That's awesome. I love that because it's forced me to learn something new. You know, like I have to actually figure out how to work with anamorphic footage, and that's cool. Like, I love it when you don't just get a new piece of gear, but you get a new piece of gear that also forces you to level up and learn new skills. The thing was, though, I didn't realize this until... Well, okay, let's put it this way. Black Friday also happened this past week, and I wasn't really looking for any Black Friday deals or anything, but I have been looking for another lens, a more practical lens, because I pretty much have my 24 millimeter lens, which is super wide. I have my 50 millimeter lens, which is like the Sony quality on that one. It's like so. It's not so great. It's not Sony great. And then I have my Canon 24 millimeter to 105 f4 lens, which is like, I've had that lens forever. That lens is like 15 years old or something, but I can adapt it to the Sony camera and have manual focus. And that's a great B-roll lens for me because I can zoom in, I get a nice compressed background, but it's an f4 lens, so it's a little funky sometimes. And I can't use autofocus with the Sony camera on it. So what I've been wanting is basically a more telephoto prime lens that I could use for videos, for B-roll footage, for B camera footage, whatever it might be. And I was really looking into macro lenses because I thought like 100 millimeter macro would be cool, especially because a lot of stuff I film has to do with products, and getting shots of like buttons and ports and, you know, small little details on something can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So a macro lens would be a huge help with that. But then I sort of stumbled into, hey, I've never had an 85 millimeter lens before, which is, you know, that's a very popular focal length, 85 millimeters. And I've just kind of overlooked it. And I was thinking, you know, the studio room where I film most of my videos is not huge. So 100 millimeter macro is awesome when I need like close-up details, but I'm not going to be able to do much else with it because the space is... I shouldn't say that. It would be really helpful to have a 100 millimeter macro lens. It still would be. But the thing with an 85 is if you wanted to do portraits, 85 millimeters is a really great focal length because it helps things to look supernatural, especially people look not supernatural, but like ultra natural. They look like people. You know, there's not any weird distortion in the face or in the features or anything, but you also get really nice background compression and subject separation and all this great stuff. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, I use my cameras to do thumbnail photos. I also just like to take photos. Heather and I both also have to take like branding photos all the time where, you know, if you're selling a course or you're doing something or whatever, you need photos like of you. And so I was like, oh, you know what? An 85 millimeter lens would be a really helpful thing to have, not just for videos, but for also photos. I should look into that. Sony has 3 85 millimeter lenses available for their systems. They have a $500 one that is an f1.8. That's their cheapest one. Then there is a Zeiss. Whoa, the dogs like the Zeiss. There's a Zeiss 85 millimeter, which is like $1,100 or $1,200. It's a 1.8. And then there's a Sony G Master, which is their higher. G Master is like Canon L series. It's their highest level lens. That's like $1,700 or $1,800. So I thought, okay, cool. I'll see if there's like Black Friday deals on the cheap one. And it gets pretty good reviews. But then friggin' Peter Lindgren again. He made a video on Black Friday, or at least that I saw that morning, where he was talking about like camera gear that I use every day. And he talked about his 85 millimeter Zeiss Batis lens, Batis. It's an f1.8. He's had it for like 4 years since he started his channel. He was just saying such good things about it. I was like, oh, Peter films a lot of like, when it comes to like product B-roll and stuff, he and I film a lot of the same type of stuff. And his stuff always looks so friggin' amazing, not just because he's talented, but also he's using the super sharp, really nice compressed 85 millimeter lens for a lot of it. And I was like, oh, geez. So then I was watching comparisons between the Zeiss and the regular Sony because the GM one is way too expensive. It's not, especially for a lens, it's not going to be my main lens. No way. So I was watching comparisons, and basically it's like both of these lenses are super good, but the Zeiss has weather sealing. It also has, a lot of people are just calling it like the Zeiss effect or the Zeiss pop, whatever it might be. There's something about it that just, it has a nice quality that really just shows up even in unedited footage and photos and things. I was like, I'm despite me getting all these lenses right now, I'm normally not somebody who gets lenses very often. And when I get a lens, I keep it for a really long time, like a 24 to 105. So I'd be okay with spending a little more money on a lens that's going to like not only let me do stuff I can't do, but also really stick around for a long time. And then it just turns out there were some Black Friday deals, nothing big, like, I think I got, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I got like $200 off the baddest lens. It was like $900 for Black Friday, which was really expensive for a lens, but a good deal for this lens. And then it came the very next day, which was super cool, which was actually just yesterday as I'm recording this. So I got to experiment with it, and then I got to film a video with it today, and it is so friggin' good. It's so good. It's so sharp. The autofocus is silent. There's still some getting used to it because it has like, the form of it is different than anything. It only has a focus ring, but it has a little OLED display on it. So learning, the characteristics of the lens and how to use it within my space will take some time, but it is awesome. I was able to get some super cool shots for the video I'm working on, which is my MacBook Pro review, like the full review. That should actually be this week's video. So that should be the one you see this upcoming Thursday. And if it is, you'll see like a lot of the B-roll is the 85 millimeter. I think the thumbnail image, depending on what the thumbnail ends up being, it might have been taken with the 85 millimeter. It might not have been, because I switched between that and the 24 millimeter throughout the video. But yeah, so it's been great. I love that lens. It's awesome. But here is the climax of this story. In both of those instances, when I was interested in getting the anamorphic lens and when I was looking at the 85 millimeter lens, it didn't even cross my mind to get a Canon lens. And I didn't realize that. And I'm just going to let that sink in. That's a big thing, because my plan back in May when I got my Sony camera was I'm going to get the Sony with 24 millimeter lens. That's maybe my main camera, but then I got my Canon cameras for everything else. And then my thought was, if I ever get new lenses, I'll get the Canon version and then I'll adapt them to the Sony. If it's manual focus, whatever, and then I can use it with everything. It literally didn't even occur to me, like, do you want to get a Canon mount for either of these lenses? Because now that I've had the Sony for 6 months or more now, it's real good. And I feel like I'm really getting a handle on it. Like, I understand the camera more. I can do more stuff with it than I could do before. And I've also even noticed I'm getting comments on videos and things from people saying like, wow, did you change something in your camera? Like, everything's looking super crisp or this, and nothing equipment wise has changed, but I've just learned more about how to use it because it is a little bit different. And I can do things with it that I couldn't do with my old cameras. And so when it came time to like, I'm going to get a new lens, I'm going to put it on this camera that lets me get like super crazy good quality really easily versus a camera that doesn't. And you know me, I love my Canon EOS Rs, but they are they are for the most part 1080 cameras, because you really have to, the 4K can be very useful, the 4K crop, especially like I said, if you're doing something close up, doing like these product shots and then flipping that into 4K, and now boom, it crops in 1.7 times. Now, like, I don't need a telephoto, or I don't need a macro lens because I got that 4K crop. It's kind of actually really helpful. And I really like the quality of the 4K footage on the EOS R. But if you're doing your main shots, you need to like adapt it or use the Metabones thing or whatever. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, it has nothing to do with, those are awesome cameras. And all of the cameras are awesome, but it just goes back to where Canon is in their like whatever they're doing in terms of video and their video customers is not working for me. And it sucks because I really wanted it to, because I've used Canon forever. My first DSLR was a Canon. Although, to be fair, the first camera I ever used was a Sony. Anyway, one of these giant billion-dollar corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations. But it's like, it's we talked about this previously. Last time we talked about Canon versus Sony, which is Canon is just doing things that aren't even out of necessity. In the past, they had limited a lot of features on their cameras basically out of being conservative for the sake of being reliable. So they weren't going to have IBIS, or they weren't going to have full frame 4K or something. Like on the EOS R, does not have full frame 4K. The reason it crops in is so that way the camera doesn't overheat. So yeah, people are going to complain like, oh, there's no full frame, whatever, but that camera just will not overheat on you. Versus something like the R5 or the R6, which now you have this beautiful image quality. It's amazing, but then you have, high resolution sensor that is cranking down footage to 4K, and then there's a lot of processing power, and then it overheats or has heating issues. It's just something you have to think about whether it's a big issue or not in your specific workflow. And that's why I like where Sony was like, oh, we're going to make a video focused camera, so it's 12 megapixels. It will never overheat because it's made for video, basically, with like photo secondary. Canon doesn't do that unless you want to spend way, 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 way more money on the Cinema series, which is great. The C series cameras are awesome, but they're way more expensive. And it's not necessarily not like what I want in my workflow. And then, we've talked about all the other things, just like the Canon R3 with micro HDMI. I'm going to go back to that because even though it might not be a big feature, like, oh, who cares if there's a full-size HDMI output or not? It's not even about that. It's them putting a micro HDMI port on a physically giant full-frame camera that costs $6,000 and is supposed to also be good for video. That's them literally like limiting and crippling the device to push people towards the higher end like Cinema series cameras. And that's really frustrating. And it feels like Canon just sort of does those things. The recording limits are still there on some cameras. Why? They should just be going away. The thing that has been keeping me, the thing that's been keeping me like my Sony test, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, was they came out with the A7 IV, which is was a $2,400 camera. It's like their low end professional camera, if that makes sense. It's like their hybrid photo video camera, and it has several cool features that the higher end cameras like the A7S III, which are more expensive, do not have. But it's all things that could easily be added with a firmware update. And so I've been waiting to see like if Sony does bring those features from the lower end camera to the higher end camera via firmware update. And I'm really hoping that they do. I don't know what their firmware release schedule is or whatever. I think the last one came out last spring. So I don't know. Canon's been pretty good with releasing firmware updates for the R series cameras, which is great. So they deserve props for that. So I want to see what Sony does. If Sony brings some of those features, very simple stuff like the shutter closing when the lens is taken off, or what is the other one? Focus breathing compensation, where the camera kind of just crops in and does something a little bit to compensate. If you have a lens that has focus breathing, you don't see it anymore. Little things like that, there's no reason that the higher end camera in the exact same physical body can't do those things. So it would be awesome if they did that. If they do that, to me, that's just going like it's the exact opposite philosophy of Canon, where you are putting your customers first. You're really trying to make them happy so that way they stick around, and then you've 100% won over a customer and me. But the fact that I didn't even consider getting Canon mount lenses kind of says a lot, actually. And so I'm prepared to make some changes in my equipment setup, which I do. There's a lot of people I think who listen to this show who have Canon cameras and lenses because of my recommendation. And I feel that it is very important to address that. I still think the EOS R is an awesome camera, especially for the price, because it just keeps getting cheaper as it gets older. My problem isn't really to do with Canon's cameras, because they're great. It's where Canon is going in the video world. And when it comes to like, well, do I want to spend a bunch of money on one lens system or another lens system or a camera system or another? Canon, I don't feel comfortable investing a lot more in that because I don't like where they're going. But if you just want like a good camera, like Canon lenses are all amazing. Canon cameras are good. But I have two EOS Rs, so I've decided that I'm going to sell one of my EOS Rs. I've put it up for sale in our Just Create More community. If you need an EOS R, you go check that out. If that doesn't work, I'll just trade it in and put the money towards another Sony, because now I have multiple Sony lenses. I don't know what the other Sony would be. That's my like conundrum, which doesn't really matter because right now, as I'm recording this, you can't buy any cameras anywhere because everything is out of stock and there's supply shortages to like probably early 2022. So it's almost a moot point in a way, but at least gives me time to think. I'm not particularly interested in the A7 IV. I think it looks awesome, but it's missing a few key features that I really love in the A7S III. So I'm kind of I was thinking of either going for like a ZV-E10, where it's a super budget option. It's like a $700 camera. It's a crop sensor camera, but it will still work with all the lenses that I have. And it's a great camera. But part of me is just thinking, you know what, just get another like really good camera. And having two EOS Rs where everything was exactly the same and they matched perfectly was kind of amazing when that was my main camera. And having that same setup would be kind of cool. So maybe another A7S III, or I've been thinking about possibly considering, and this would all depend on like, saving money and stuff too. But I've been thinking about also maybe an FX3, which is the A7S III just in a different body. But it could be kind of fun to have like, hey, different form factor, but same image quality, same menus, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what I've been thinking. And then I decided also to put one of my Canon lenses up for sale, which is the 16-35 f4. It's an amazing lens. It's like one lens I rarely ever use. I got it when I thought I was going to be doing a lot more vlog style stuff, and 16-35 is it's a great focal range for vlogging, but that's just not what my channel became. It's not the kind of videos I ended up making. And especially once I got my Sigma 24 1.4, it's like, that lens is so good that I wasn't going to go back to like a f4 lens that was kind of the same focal length, but it's a really good lens. And it has image stabilization, which is very cool. The f2.8 16-35 do not have image stabilization. So that's for sale too on the Just Create More community if you need that or you want that. It's a great lens, but selling an EOS R helps me then better fund, the new lenses that I have. And also, again, like I talked about at the very beginning of the show, helps me make sure the equipment's actually getting used. Although I'm not selling these for $1. I put the EOS R at $1,200 with the EF to RF adapter. And now I'm just sounding like I'm selling stuff, but whatever. Put that there because even on Black Friday, the EOS R was still $1,500, so I thought that was good. I think I put the 16-35 at $850. Yeah, so that's there. Otherwise, I've been talking with Adorama about their trade-in program, which like they do not give you as much as you would get selling it yourself, but they will give you. I think they would give me like, what were they going to give me? Something like $900, $800 for the EOS R, which to me was like not really worth it. But they did say, oh, we can give you more if you put the money towards something instead of just cashing out. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm waiting to hear exactly what it would be for like a A7S III or an FX3, how much credit I would have for that. But that could be kind of cool. All my stuff is in like new condition, so that shouldn't be a problem. But anyway, that's been this has been gear talk just because there's been so much like shuffling in gear, which has been really fun, like learning about new stuff and figuring new things out. but the realization that Mr. like Canon fan, didn't even consider, it literally didn't even cross my mind to check out the Canon mount offerings when I was getting either the Sarui lens or the 85 millimeter lens. And Canon has, there's other options because Canon makes other 85 millimeter lenses, and it didn't even cross my mind. And that just showed me how happy I've been with the Sony camera. And it's just such a crazy thing because I really I didn't want to, it just felt like there was so much hype around Sony cameras, and people are just like, oh, like, Team Sony, blah, 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 like, welcome to the real side or whatever. And I was just like, you guys are way too into like your camera brand allegiance. And I kind of get it now. It's because they're really good cameras. They're really good cameras. And the fact that I can do things that I couldn't do before and do things more easily and get better results, it's kind of hard to argue with that. And then if the company itself is creating updates and products and things that clearly have the users in mind rather than the product line in mind, that is kind of cool. And yeah, so I don't know. I hope you don't hate me for saying that. But yeah, I mean, like the EOS R is a great camera. Like I said, I have two of them. I'm still keeping one of them. It's not going anywhere. I love that camera. And it is it's a higher resolution still photo camera than my Sony is. So when I'm doing something that's just photo specific, that's the camera I go for. And I do still have my Canon 24-105 lens, which I love. That's not going anywhere. If you don't have a 24-105, it's probably worth at least renting one just to see, because it's a really versatile focal length. F4 might be hit or miss depending on the conditions that you shoot in, but a 24-105 is just such a great all-around lens. I've still got my Sigma 24 with the Canon mount, which I use a lot, and the Sigma adapter with a Sony will let that lens have autofocus in video. So that lens actually works with both camera systems. I've got my RF 50mm 1.8, which, like I mentioned, I love. It's such a good lens. It's so sharp. And that's it. And then I had the 16-35, which I put up for sale just because it's really not getting used, and I feel so bad for that poor lens just sitting there. I think those are all my lenses. I think that's it. Yeah. I mean, for now. But, I don't know. Getting the anamorphic lens and seeing wow. It was like, I haven't felt that way since I got like my first prime lens, where you're like, wow, I'm creating imagery that does not look like anything I've been able to make before. And that is purely because of this tool. And that is really cool. So that kind of then rekindled, well, what else am I missing out on? Or, what could I be doing that I'm not doing? That would be great. So anyway, that's all gear stuff. I know it was sort of a hodgepodge, but I thought the Sony Canon really kind of leaning towards replacing one of my Canons with a Sony. So instead of having two Canons and a Sony, having two Sonys and a Canon, I thought that's kind of a big deal. And that 3-camera setup, which we talked about ages ago when I first got it, felt so over the top and just ridiculous. But let me tell you, at least for the kind of stuff I do, the 3-camera setup has been amazing. Total pain in the butt to like keep track of the footage and edit and stuff. But the flexibility, having a main camera, especially the A7S III, which can crop in without losing detail, crop out. So that shot there is already 2 shots because it's the main wide shot plus cropping in. Having the 50mm off to the side is then a 3rd shot. And then what I'll often do is take the other camera and either put it as an overhead camera or off to the side somewhere as like a close-up detail camera. If you watched my Canon L1 video that came out this past week, which I really love, I promise it's interesting, even if it doesn't sound like something you'll be interested in. Go check it out. If you listen to this part of this episode, you'll be interested in that video. Let's put it that way. If you watch that and you see there's regular B-roll shots in it, but there's also ones where you can tell it's filmed at the same time, like a close-up of the camera, and that's the 3rd camera. Having angles like that, it's almost like the Home Shopping Network angle where you can see the detail of something as I'm holding it, but there's no other camera operator or anything. The 3-camera setup has been amazing. So that gives me 4 shots as soon as I put the footage into the computer, not counting any of the additional B-roll shots or graphics or anything. So it's really helped the videos to become a lot more dynamic and a lot more visually interesting and given me a lot more creative flexibility. So the multi-camera thing is like, it's awesome. I love it. It might not be for everyone, but it is totally working great for me. So there's that. That being said, if you've got any thoughts, as always, feel free to share them to me with tom@enthusiasmproject.com. Next week is going to be the season 5 finale. And then I am going to be taking a bit of a podcast break, probably through most of January. I want to get ideas for season 6. And then I've also got a few family issues, events, things, commitments, I should say. Issues sounded bad. Family commitments coming up in January. And I don't want to have to juggle like podcast family, like if I can we'll just set one thing off to the side and come back to it. So season 6 will probably start up in February, which sounds like a long time from now, but it is not a long time from now. And we still have the last episode of season 5. The reason I bring that up is if there's something you want to have in next week's episode, the season finale, please send that to tom@enthusiasmproject.com. And that way I can include it in the show, whether it's a written message or audio or video, whatever you want it to be, interpretive dance, whatever it might be. Feel free to send that, and then I can include that. And of course, you know where to find me at Sodor Tom and all the things, YouTube videos. This week's video, keep an eye out for the MacBook Pro review, which will have a lot of shots from that Badass 85, which is a badass lens. I don't know if that pun works or not. And then next week's video is going to have every shot of it is with the Sarui anamorphic lens. Even the B-roll shots and everything were with it. So that's been really fun. And that's pretty much it. So as always, thanks for spending your time with me. I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week. And I will see you next time.